A warm welcome and very good evening to all of you. And we are indeed delighted to have the presence of Dr. Vijay Kelkar as a speaker on this important issue and subject of immense interest to all of us.
I am essentially going to talk on the recent report which prepared for the Ministry of Finance called Roadmap of Fiscal Consolidation. I thought that in terms of explaining what we did, a lot of people, including many of my friends, asked what is fiscal consolidation? I mean, that's the first question, because when we were asked by the government to do it, asked what is fiscal consolidation? So fiscal consolidation is essentially means reducing fiscal deficits and reducing public debt. Now, second then question is, what is fiscal deficit? Again, it's very simple. Fiscal deficit is essentially the excess of government expenditure over its income. Now, the question comes, why? I mean, why was government concerned? And there are two main reasons. One is that even casual observer of Indian economic saw that our fiscal deficit, as we defined, has been increasing steadily after the financial crisis of 2008-2009. So our public debt was increasing, our fiscal deficit was increasing year by year, steadily, and relentlessly was increasing. That itself would not have been that much problem if India was a closed economy. But we are in an open economy now. It's more so after liberalization. Indian economy much more open now. Now foreign trade accounts almost 50% of GDP, which is only 20%, only 20 years ago when we started opening up. And if you take into account the capital account transactions, now they exceed the total GDP. So Indian economy is very open, much more open than middle class. Worst problem is, unlike dollar or yen or Deutschmark or now euro, Indian rupee is a reserve currency. The rest of the world is not willing to hold rupee as a reserve currency, which means the current account deficit, which was also increasing pari passu the fiscal deficit, was creating problem for financing. And there is an intimate, almost organic link between fiscal deficit and current account deficit. Now, what is this current account deficit? Current account deficit is nothing but the difference between total foreign exchange earnings which we get from exports of goods and services, between that and total imports we do of goods and services, that's the current account deficit. And that was increasing, that was linked to fiscal deficit. 1-to-1. The current account deficit, which is only hovering only 1.52%, started shooting up over the last 4 years, and now is 4.2 for 21. I mean, till the fiscal year which ended in recently, which never happened in the past, other than the year 91 when crisis, if you remember 91 crisis. Because it showed, at least it was clear in our mind, and we acknowledged in our report that all data is given by the government after conclusion hours. We don't hold ministry responsible for our conclusions. But it was clear that if nothing is done, we're going to increase our fiscal deficit by not the 5.1, but only 6.1, and our current account deficit will go to 4.3%, if not more. Second, and which is even more important, that unlike 91, India is now far more energy dependent. Now 80% of energy we import. And the world prices of energy compared to 91 has increased 3.5 times. Without energy, you can't grow. Energy is absolutely essential requirement. So that is inescapable requirement for imports for the Indian economy. The second change. And third, even more explosive compared to 91, is now the demographic transition, in which the number of young people who are educated now increasing manifold compared to 91. And we calculated, unless just to absorb new entrants, India must grow minimum 7%. If you don't grow 7%, you will have millions of people waiting and asking for jobs, and that's a very, very politically explosive cocktail. So we argued in the paper, that's how our first chapter ends, saying that India is staring at perfect storm. If no action is taken, India is staring at perfect storm in terms of social disorder, economic disorder, and also we pointed out, we thought subtly, and is that there's yet one more problem now facing India compared to 91. India is now responsible nuclear power. And responsible nuclear power must have responsible fiscal policies. Otherwise, that autonomy can be questioned by international community. So even the autonomy, the strategic autonomy this country needs in terms of nuclear power could have been also questioned by the rest of the world. So there was this, so all these are really pointers to a perfect storm. So this is how our first chapter ends. Our second chapter, which was, Minister has given us two mandates. He said, tell me what's happening in the country now for this year, fiscal year, 2012-13, I want to know. And then he said, give me the roadmap for medium term. So we looked at, as I mentioned to you, we looked at the growing subsidies in petroleum, fertilizer, and food. All democratic countries, I mean, we are not peculiar in this, all democratic countries, some politicians don't tell the truth. And this is a problem in the United States, this is a problem in Europe, and this is a problem in India, where our politicians were not willing to tell people that energy prices have gone up, and they are going to stay high. The old days of cheap energy is over. We are going to an energy-dependent country. So sooner or later, we must face these energy prices and accept them. I think we did not correct our energy prices. So correspondingly, our fertilizer subsidy went up. And food subsidy was increased for different reasons. But fertilizer subsidy had other negative impact, that it completely distorted the use of fertilizer in India by using excessively nitrogenous fertilizer compared to P and K, and which created further problems of soil erosion and other problems. And same problem came in energy subsidies of power sector. So correspondingly, this country subsidized energy and related sector almost by 3% of GDP. And that is India's problem. So as I said to somebody, the Gangotri of India's problem today of declining growth, fiscal crisis, current account crisis, is our fiscal subsidies. So our estimate for this year was 6.1 if you don't do nothing. And we clearly say it's not acceptable because of what it means for India. So we gave the roadmap for this year itself. We believe that it can be brought down to 5.2. And measures we have given is by increasing tax revenues, by improving tax administration, by improving tax compliance. Then second, we have argued that we can enormously increase revenues of government by doing disinvestment of government assets. And the fourth, of course, we have suggested cuts in expenditure which are not productive. So using all these things, we can bring down our expenditure and deficit to 5.2. And then we have recommended the planned reduction in over the next 2 years of diesel to be abolished over 24 months. And there's no big bang. We have suggested go small steps because big bang is not a way to you destabilize the consumer, you destabilize the economy. So we've reduced subsidies by 1% of GDP from current 3.2 to 2.2, and then terminal year about 1.7. So there's slow decline, steady decline, determined sort of path which is a sort of soft landing for the economy. And we also now identified new source of revenue for government, which is surplus land, which government has, which is not utilized. Currently, I chair a foundation called India Development Foundation, and we are running a major research project on this, how to use underutilized land for financing urban infrastructure. So we are given that as one more instrument of policy. And with this, we have argued that our economy will come back to the debt GDP ratio about 60%. the growth will come back to 8 to 9%, which I said is required now, just to absorb our people who are now, young people who want to come into labor force. Nothing promotes more inclusive growth than giving employment, productive employment to our young people. That has to be priority number one, and we have argued that we will create enough employment through this growth in output, and we said we will resume the growth within 2 years. So the basic moral of our story of which we are given is that our problem is homegrown. We created the problem. We can't blame the rest of the world, which means we can solve it ourselves by own action, our own policy action. So if we take policy action on our own, we don't require the rest of the world to help us out. We can do it ourselves. We can come back to our growth, which was 8 to 9%, go back to that golden age of growth, which future historians will call next 20 years, hopefully as a golden age of growth, and we can resume that growth path by our own policy actions. So this is what we have finally concluded, that we are very optimistic that we can do it ourselves and we can go back to that growth path. So I want to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
I do know about what you're going to propose as far as government land is concerned. Because when you speak of government land, you've got a certain number of services on government land which are of immediate interest to citizens. Post office, income tax office, etc., etc. But you also have a large number of government offices which do not come into direct contact with the citizens. One of them, for example, are these huge defense lands. In many cities, you don't need defense establishments so close to the city. Why is it not possible, because of the nature of the work that defense personnel do, to put them much further away, so that that land can then be utilized for other purposes?
You know, in our report, we didn't mention defense land, because it's still a sacred cow. And I said, let's first do the easier ones first, and before you take on, because even in Australia and for our study we do in Australia and Canada, they're finding defense is the most difficult to tackle. But we can go a little later. We have port trust land, we have got railways land, we have public sector land, we have state government land. There's enormous amount of land before we come to the difficult area of defense. So defense we didn't mention at all. It will take time, but there are many others available before that. And even, as I mentioned, the Ahmedabad study, we didn't take defense lands. But we include ISRO, and because it's a space organization, but not defense. So without including defense, still enormous space still exists. And you're right. I mean, if you include defense, of course, it is El Dorado, but we didn't want to put that.
Whether the money will go for the preparation of the food for the next lunch, or it will go to some black hole, wherefrom it will not come. Therefore, that credibility is to be established.
That's true, but I think the whole manthan which is going on in this country is towards that only. I'm quite optimistic about what's happening in this country through RTI, through movement taking place, grassroots level. Questions are being raised by the press, by young people, and this whole to improve accountability of our political system. And the whole process is, I think, in the direction in which we are going, will increase accountability as you are demanding of the political class.